You are tuned in to the Monday Night Carlo, Sports and Entertainment Sportscast. And now, without further ado, I give to you the one and only Carlo.
Hello everybody and welcome to Monday Night Carlo. It's going to be a great chat tonight. I've got a really good feeling about this. The man on the line with me right now, his name is Joe Fortunato, and he is a professor of film at the Arizona State University. Joe, welcome to the show, man. How are you?
I'm good, Carlo. Thanks for having me.
No problem, man. I really, when I think about chatting with someone on a podcast, there's no better person I can think of as you, man, because I've had you on before with the Movie Night Carlo chats, and we had you on talking about Close Encounters and things like that, and it's just great to hear your voice, man. So, very much looking forward to this.
Oh, well, thank you. If you can't think of anybody better, I can think of a dozen, but you're too kind.
Okay, so let's start. Let's hear a little bit about you, Joe, and just tell the world about yourself.
Well, as you mentioned, I'm currently a professor of film and screenwriting at Arizona State University. Prior to that, I won't go too far back, but I grew up in Ohio in the United States, and after college started my career, went out to Hollywood and started my career as a page at NBC, nice. Where I gave tours and got a seat The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, so that was kind of cool.
That was cool.
Yeah, Johnny Carson was a hero of mine, so to actually kind of interact is maybe too kind a word or way to put it, but to see him live in person frequently or daily was pretty cool.
Before you continue, Joe, I just want to ask you something. One of the reasons I love broadcasts and I love podcasting so much is because of American talk shows, and yeah. I'm actually a big wrestling fan, so I've been brought up watching American culture and American humor, and actually one of my favorite funny men in the US is Conan O'Brien, and I just think he's hilarious. I wonder what your take is, just before we go, just before you continue, what your take is on Conan and Jimmy Fallon and them kind of guys.
Well, as I mentioned, Johnny Carson was a hero of mine growing up. So when and in my high school years, David Letterman kind of took that role.
Yes.
So I'm sort of very sad that he's leaving, and I'm feeling old because of that. But it's funny that you say that, because I think, if I recall correctly, how I don't know if they do this in England or not, but when we have our yearbook photos in America, you usually put a few blurbs about yourself or whatever, and yes. I said future occupation talk show host, which never really materialized, but shows you the esteem that I have for those people, and yeah, I do. I watch almost all of them, or at least check in with them as frequently as I can. I don't have enough time in the day to watch every show all the time.
Yeah.
I really, I do like Conan. I like, one of the things I like about Conan is that he was a writer. I'm sure he's a writer for The Simpsons and Saturday Night Live. And, so I like that background. I really think that Jimmy Fallon is terrific. And, I know a lot, I think this is true of a lot of talk show hosts. There's sort of either love him, hate him kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But I think Fallon is great. And this is almost sacrilege saying this, so I want to kind of say it with a grain of salt. But, I actually sort of, when I see him, I sort of think sometimes of a young Johnny Carson, just in his mannerisms and style.
The thing I get with Jimmy Fallon is, Joe, that I find him very, very humble. He seems very normal to me. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. He feels like the kind of guy that you would want to hang out with and be friends or go to dinner with or whatever. And when you're welcoming someone into your home every day or every night, that's a pretty critical skill to project.
That is indeed. So I know that you're a lecturer on Spielberg and Lucas. So how did that begin for you?
Well, as I said, as I was sort of telling my story, I got my start as a page at NBC in Burbank. Actually, also had an internship at the Today Show. So I've worked at NBC both New York, 30 Rock, and in Burbank. Anyway, kind of worked my way up. I was a television executive, then became a television writer for a short period of time. And eventually life led me into academia. And for the past 10 years or so, I've been teaching, and I've been in academia after sort of leaving Hollywood.
Right.
And I do teach some production classes and a screenwriting class at Arizona State, and a couple of electives. Probably my flagship elective that's the most popular, and probably my favorite, if I'm being honest, is my class on Spielberg and Lucas.
Yes.
And as you might imagine, it fills up every semester, and I'm pretty sure that is only a small part because of me and a big part of the subject matter.
So how do you go about your classes? What kind of things, in what areas do you teach about Spielberg?
Well, I tend to go a little bit chronologically for both, and in one semester there's too much to cover for certainly when I have both of these guys, but even if it was just Spielberg, there's just too much. So I tend to favor for both of them their early career.
Yes.
Not only kind of that's what put them on the map and made them famous, but surprisingly, and this is another thing that makes me feel old, and I'm not really that old, is so many of these college-age students don't know those films. They've heard of them, but, when you ask half the room, or you ask, how many of you have seen Star Wars, and only half the room raises their hand, your jaw drops. And so, if nothing else, I feel like it's a mission to get them to understand where Spielberg and Lucas came from in their career.
That must seem really weird, because I'm 35 now, and just thinking about that itself as a thing, it just seems mystifying to me that a lot of people wouldn't have seen Star Wars or seen Jaws or seen E.T. But as we're getting older, I guess more the generation shifts. Jim?
It totally does. I mean, this is maybe a story we can elaborate on later, but Jaws is my favorite movie.
Yes.
And it's actually the movie that made me want to go into the entertainment industry. And I saw it when I was 7, when it first came out. And so not only do I love it, and it's an important movie to me personally, but it's a groundbreaking movie for a lot of people. I mean, a lot of famous directors and stuff sort of cite Jaws as that moment. Bryan Singer, Kevin Smith, the list. And it shifts generationally, because for a lot of my students, Jurassic Park is their Jaws.
Yes.
That's where they were, 7 years old or whatever they were, and, they saw, and their eyes bugged out when, Dr. Grant crosses the hill and sees the dinosaurs.
That's so funny that you say that, Joe, because I have a cousin that's around probably 10 years younger than me, and we kind of grew up together, because I basically kind of brought him up when he was younger, and babysat and all that kind of stuff. And the funny part about it is, for me, just like you, my favourite movie ever made is Jaws. Just as he was getting older, he hit that time where Jurassic Park was the biggest movie for him. So just like you said, his biggest movie is Jurassic Park to my Jaws,
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going off topic a little bit here, but for a lot of that same generation, their Star Wars was Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
And it does come generationally. Now, that said, there are still quite a few students that know and love all these original films. So they, lest we forget or lest we lose heart, these films are timeless, and they do speak to the new generation. I don't have kids myself, but my cousin has two twin boys who are, what are they, 8 years old now, and they're in their Star Wars phase. So, definitely.
So before we begin talking about movies, each their own, and the movies as we go, let's begin with hearing about why Steven Spielberg for you, Joe. What is it about Steven that caught your eye and your imagination?
Well, as I said, I saw Jaws when I was 7, my mom took me to see Jaws, and we can debate my mother's questionable parenting skills taking a 7-year-old to see Jaws. But we saw, and I remember I saw it at the Lynn Theater in Akron, Ohio. At 7 years old, I was old enough to understand the concept of movies being, not real and fake. I mean, it was lights on a silver screen. I understood that in my head.
Yes.
But when I went home that night, I didn't want to get in the bathtub. I didn't want to get in my cousin's pool the next day. I didn't want to go on the family trip to Myrtle Beach. I didn't want anything to do with water.
I hate it.
And I, at that moment, I realized the power, even though I knew this was lights on a silver screen, the power of storytelling literally changed how I behaved and how I thought.
Right.
And that made my head explode and blew my mind. And I don't even think I knew yet, really, that this was Steven Spielberg's film. And of course, that would come later. But that's what hooked me, pun intended, I guess, that the power of storytelling. So I was so fascinated how seeing Jaws would make me change my behavior. And I knew right then I wanted to go in the entertainment industry in some capacity. And that changed over the years. First it was a director, then an executive, and eventually found my way into writing. But so that was the moment. And it turned out then, as years, throwing a little love to Lucas, 2 years later when Star Wars came out, I was 10 years old. At that point, I kind of got a little more fascinated about how a movie got made. Nowadays we take for granted that there's, 50,000 extras on a DVD, about, how stuff gets done. And back then it was pretty limited, but there was a lot of, magazine articles and even a couple specials on television showing how Star Wars was made. And so that process fascinated me. And, like anybody around that same age, I was, mesmerized by Star Wars. So, that 1-2 punch of Jaws and Star Wars, really, really got me going. And then, I'm sorry, I'm kind of rambling. I'm very excited about the topic. But when I sort of became a little bit more aware of Spielberg then, as a person who was the man behind these films that I loved, certainly when Close Encounters came out the same year as Star Wars, and that's a whole other story. I always think that those movies get linked, and yet they're so different. But I also, at around the same time, believe it or not, there was a late night sort of movie host that we had in the Cleveland area, and they showed, they would show monster movies and scary movies, and usually kind of low budget, crappy, late night monster movies. And one night they showed Duel, and they even said, this is one of the best movies we've ever had, and I was fascinated by Duel. And then I realized it was the same guy that made Jaws and Close Encounters, and that's when I sort of became aware of Spielberg.
So let's talk Jaws. I mean, you've kind of elaborated a little bit on it there, but when you talk to people and you kind of mention to people that this was the original summer blockbuster, I don't think they really get it now, and I think that is something that's key to this movie, because it just shows to me just how big this movie was. I mean, this movie is such a massive influence in my life. It's my favorite movie ever made, just as it's yours. But for me, this movie is also a big family moment, because when my parents used to go away, my parents have their own business, and they used to go away and basically they own a wedding business, Joe. So they go away and they done kind of bridal fairs, buying things away from home and that kind of thing. So when they were away and they left us alone in the summer, there was just me and my brother. My brother is around 6 years older than me, so he was looking after me, and we used to have the movie nights. And basically, one movie night, I was a really young kid. I was only around 8 or 9 years old, but one of the movie nights he showed me Jaws, and as soon as we'd finished complete watching Jaws the first time round, the first thing I wanted to do was watch it again. So to me, it was just mesmerizing. The cast itself just blew me away. My favorite character from the whole movie being Quint. And even now, I'll be at work and I'll be quoting lines from the film without even knowingly doing it, and that kind of thing, Joe. So
I do that all the time. Yeah.
For me, it's just such a big, impactful movie, and the movie not only has become a favorite with me, but with my family because of it as well, Joe. So
Well, my dog is named Brody. And that is directly after Chief Martin Brody.
So have you got any favorite scenes from the film itself?
Boy, it's funny because it's a genuine answer. I mean, my favorite movie is Jaws, so I'm not just making that up as to have an answer. But when people learn that you're a film professor, that's the first question they ask. So I get asked all the time, "What's your favorite movie?" And so I'm ready with my answer. And they're a little surprised at that a lot of times. I'm not really sure why, but I say Jaws, and more often than not, I'll get the "Huh, really?" Which of course is.
Let me tell you though, I completely agree. When people say to me or ask me what my favourite scenes are in the movie, I'll say, well, the movie itself, because as a complete movie, I think it's a masterpiece, Joe.
As do I, yeah.
What do you feel about, let's move on to Close Encounters, because I know you featured it, in your talk on our special podcast that we had. How do you feel about Close Encounters as a film?
Well, it's funny. That's one that I appreciate more and more as the years progress.
Yes.
I remember, and because I'm a little bit older than you, I'm for the listeners to put this in context, I'm 47 now. So,
right.
I was right there in the wheelhouse when these movies were coming out. And I remember this girl named Lisa on the school bus. She was a year older than me. We kind of had these daily, what I would say now is sort of nerd battles, that, I would say, no, Star Wars is better. And she'd go, no, Close Encounters is better. How can you say that? And as the years go by, I'm certainly not really ready to say one is better than the other, but I so much more appreciate, Close Encounters.
Yes.
And, I don't know so much what to say other than, probably like many people, I'm fascinated and always have been with the concept of, life elsewhere. And, the question when I talk about Close Encounters with students, or really, I guess anybody, but, the question comes, would you do what Roy does? Would you go on the ship? And to me, the answer is an unqualified absolutely. And yet that's not everybody's answer. In fact, half the room, says no. And I find it interesting. I think I might have mentioned this, in the original podcast that we did on that, Spielberg himself talks about that being one of his most personal movies and how he would do it differently now that he's a father and has children and whatnot. And I don't have children, as I said. I would love to someday, hopefully, knock on wood. But, it's easier, I suppose, for someone like me who, doesn't have the obligations of children or something to just say, yeah, I'm getting on the ship and walking away. I love my family. I don't want to leave them, but boy, what an opportunity. And yet Spielberg said that's what he would have done when he was, in his 20s, late 20s making the movie. But then later on, if he'd made it 20 years later, he wouldn't have had Roy get on the ship. And anyway, it's kind of an interesting sort of psychological litmus test. What would you do? And I think that's, one of the great moments of the movie. And frankly, I think, there's so many great moments in the film, but at the end, that final John Williams, and how can we not talk about John Williams in this podcast?
Yes.
His music swells and the mothership takes off, and I'm crying. I swear,
It's such a powerful movie, and I'd love to know, Joe, what was your take? Do you love the original cut or do you love the extended cut?
I'm a traditionalist, so I almost always say I want the traditional cut of anything.
Yes.
And I guess I would say it here. It's funny because I know, like, scholarly wise what the differences are, but I don't feel and maybe it's just over the years you see you see one cut or the other and it kind of blends together. So sometimes I kind of lose track of which cut is which. But yeah, I don't see the need to go into the ship. So
definitely, I think it kind of, in a way, it ruins your own imagination. And I also think that there's a lot of films that do that, even nowadays. I feel like you need the movie to engage your imagination, and that is probably if there's anything that Steven does the best, I think that's one of the things he does the best.
Absolutely. And, if we're talking about theatrical cuts versus director's cuts, maybe we should talk 1941. I don't know that anyone else wants to.
Yeah.
But
do you ever get asked about that maybe, Joe? What is your take on that film? How do you find it?
Well, honestly, I don't get asked about it that much because most people forget that it even exists.
Yes.
Every once in a while it sort of pops up on the radar a little bit, and now that it's been released on Blu-ray, it's kind of popping back up on the radar. And, it's, I actually just wrote a paper, on 1941 that I'm presenting at a conference soon.
Right.
And it's, I forgot your original question already, but, we were talking about the different cuts. And, this is the main criticism of the film, which I agree with, is it's Spielberg at his most unrestrained and, everything in the kitchen sink. And,
yes.
and, the backstory on that film too is that there was a lot of cooks in that kitchen, the two Bobs, John Milius, and whatnot. So there was a lot of, Spielberg at the height of his creative control, budgets from two studios, a whole bunch of people with different ideas. It's sort of directionless, and it's like, let's put everything in here and see if it sticks. And it's just, it's unrestrained. And the longer cut of that is probably worse than the shorter cut.
So before we move on to the next film that I want to ask you about, I just want to touch base with another subject, because on my podcast in general now, I like to ask people about conspiracy theories. And we were talking about Close Encounters of the Third Kind. So I would like to know, for you personally, Joe, about Area 51, and whether you think that's an actual alien base or just a government base. What is your thoughts on it?
I will say this: I am not a conspiracy theorist,
right?
But I enjoy listening to them, and I've never visited Area 51. It's not that far from me, actually. I should probably go sometime. But it's I don't know the answer to that, but the best way I guess I could answer it is I, without question, believe that there is life elsewhere. It just makes mathematical sense to me. Knowing that I believe that, I guess anything else is possible.
Does the Spielberg movie aid in that at all?
In my belief of Area 51?
Yes, yeah.
I wouldn't say that it does or doesn't.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I was just checking.
I'll also say this too. I would love for Area 51 to have aliens, either having visited there or being alien. I mean, I would love that.
Yes.
I'm a little skeptical that that's what actually is the truth, but I want to believe that.
So it's funny that we're going to bring this up, because obviously this is the first movie with the Lucas and Spielberg link, but Indiana Jones is one of the movies that I wanted to talk to you about, and which is funny because after the Harrison Ford plane crash yesterday.
Yeah, I'm not sure when this is going to air, but I guess by the time it does, people will have known about that. Fortunately, he was okay.
Yes, yeah, we've got to cover that. Obviously, Harrison Ford is a legend as well. I need to put that in there. But what do you feel about Indiana Jones as a whole franchise, and even your thoughts on the Crystal Skull movie as well, Jim?
Well, all right, we want to work backwards from Crystal Skull. I'm fairly generous in my opinions with these things, because my take, I understand people's criticism of Crystal Skull, or for that matter, the prequel trilogy of Lucas or whatever.
Yeah.
My take is I'd rather have more than less.
Yes.
So give me a fourth Indiana Jones, and if I don't like it, so be it. Give me a fifth and a sixth, and if I don't like it, so be it.
Can I be honest, though? Can I be completely honest?
Sure.
I actually like The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I don't know whether it's the old school in me and I was kind of seeing it to be more than what was actually in front of me, but I actually enjoyed the film. Okay, it wasn't the greatest of the trilogy, but there was parts in it where I felt that it was very old school. There was parts of it that made me laugh, and I actually really liked Shia LaBeouf as Mutt in the film as well. I thought it was great.
Well, I was a little less keen on that, and I'll be honest, it's been a while since I've seen it, so I might have to revisit it to answer that opinion. But, I think my answer is I'd rather have more Indiana Jones than no more Indiana Jones, because to me it doesn't necessarily detract from the greatness of the original.
Yes.
So, you know, and I sort of feel that way with, you know, I don't want to go too far off topic here, but Superman movies. You know, I liked Brandon Routh's Superman movie much more than anyone else did, and I realized it wasn't as good as, you know, the original Christopher Reeves movie, at least, you know, the first two anyway. But I want more Superman. So give me a Superman every year and I'll be the judge if it's good or bad, you know.
What do you think about kind of critics in general, Joe? Does it bother you what other people think of movies, or is it your opinion solely that matters to kind of you and your friends?
Well, I mean, I don't have any problem with critics being critics. I mean, yes, they're entitled to their opinion just as much as me or you or our friends. Yeah. This is an interesting question because as a film professor, I get, you know, there's sometimes an assumption that my tastes are, you know, kind of haughty, for lack of a better word, or
right.
And you know, what I always try and tell my students is, look, as long as you're able to defend why you like or dislike a movie,
yes,
I'm cool with that. So if you can understand what, you know, I guess what I'm trying to say is I like great classic films, and I can tell you why they're great classic films. And then I like other movies that are much less than classics that I still like.
Yes.
And I can even tell you why they suck, but that doesn't mean I don't like them, you know. So
I completely agree.
Yeah, I mean, I have no problem with critics, but I ultimately am going to form my own opinion.
You're tuned into Monday Night Carlo, the sports pop culture podcast, available on iTunes, Spreaker, and Stitcher Radio. So why not hit that subscribe button now? Monday Night Carlo, where pop culture fun lives.
As a standout question, as a standalone question, I'd like to ask you, what is the movie that is forefront in your mind that you actually really love that probably not a lot of people or other people would?
Oh, wow. Gosh, you put me on the spot. I don't know that I
have one.
Well, why don't you go, and then maybe it'll spur a memory jog for me.
Okay, so there's a movie called Frequency that has Dennis Quaid and Jim Caviezel, and I actually really, really like the film. I'm a big time travel movie fan. I love Back to the Future, which I think we're going to talk about later.
Yeah.
But Frequency, for me, I think the script is really cool. I think the time travel element in the movie is very cool. I don't know if you've heard of it, but
I've heard of it, but I've not seen it, so I'll be honest on that.
I got very, very mixed reviews, and not a lot of people liked it. But for some reason, it kind of jogged so many memories of me. I think if you saw it, Joe, you'd probably quite like it, being the Back to the Future kind of little link there, and the movie itself. Yeah, but for me, I think Frequency is very much one of my favorite films.
Well, I'm going to cheat a little bit on this answer because, you know, I mean, there's movies that I can sit here and say that I like, but I don't know that they would be critical darlings.
Okay.
but you know, they were still beloved. I mean,
yeah.
They're sort of generational, like, you know, Caddyshack and Stripes, and you know, I mean, you know, I don't know anybody, you know, at least American males my age that don't love those movies, but I'm not going to sit there and put them, you know, next to The Graduate in terms of you know, artistic merit.
Yes.
But I'll go back to what I was saying a little bit ago, and again, this is maybe a cheat because it's a personal love of mine.
Okay.
But you know, Superman Returns. I don't get the hate there. There's things I don't like. I don't like that Superman has a kid. I don't like that, you know, I mean, there's a lot of things I don't like.
Yes.
But I love the connection with the, you know, the sort of the homage to the John Williams score, and you know, I miss that with Man of Steel. I mean, like I said, I'll take more Superman than less.
Yes.
But you know, being such a fan of the original Richard Donner, Christopher Reeve collaborations, you know, I liked that Superman Returns kind of paid homage to that. So you know, I was very happy.
And I guess being, as talking about Spielberg on the podcast, we have to bring up Hook as well, because it was a movie with very, very mixed reviews, but I love the film.
Well, that's an interesting one too, because that was one that kind of escaped me. I've seen it, so I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say I haven't. I've seen every Spielberg film, but it was not in my wheelhouse. I don't know if it was just the age. I was too old to appreciate it. It's but it is interesting that you bring that up, because it's one of those films, kind of like, and it was just a couple years before, like Jurassic Park, where my students love Hook.
Yes.
And it's kind of sort of an ongoing, well, not so much now, because now that I've been doing this for a while, my students, the students that I had 10 years ago loved Hook. Now not so much the ones now. But, it is, I think, a little bit of a generational thing. I mean, if you love the Goonies, you're probably going to love Hook.
So let's go back to Indiana Jones, and obviously we need to cover Raiders of the Lost Ark. So
okay. I derailed your conversation there. Sorry.
No, you're okay. Let's talk Raiders and what your thoughts are on the film. Did you see this one in the cinema, Joe?
I did. In fact, I have a personal memory of that too. I remember my dad and I don't want to sit here and he's passed, but right. I don't want to say we weren't close or anything, but we didn't have any similar shared interest, really.
Okay.
The things he liked, I didn't really care for, and the things I liked, he didn't really understand, and so I didn't come from a house where, people watched movies or, anything like that. But he took me to see Raiders of the Lost Ark. So I remember going to the movie with my dad, which was a pretty rare occurrence. And my memory is, and I could be embellishing this over time, is that he liked it, and I liked that he liked it, and it kind of bonded us and made us closer. So I mean, kind of the movie aside, that personal memory is special to me. Certainly I love Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I remember being in the theater watching that opening sequence with the boulder and whatnot, and I was pretty mesmerized.
So let's move on to Jurassic Park, and obviously we brought it up before, and I think you've recorded some bits for me before on the podcast for another Movie Night Carlo. But what do you feel about Jurassic Park? Do you think that's the classic it kind of lives up to be?
I was a little older at that period of time, and again, I don't know. I'm sure people don't care too much about my personal memories of these things. My personal memory, I just told the story of going to see Raiders of the Lost Ark with my dad. I was actually on a date when I went to see Jurassic Park, and we were sitting like in the second row, so our heads were craned up, and it was very big, and it was an event. But I certainly loved Jurassic Park.
Yes.
I was older at the time, so it didn't affect me in the same way as it would have if I was a kid, or like it probably did my students, who I mentioned earlier. But I'll be honest with you. I mean, I think certainly all kids are fascinated with dinosaurs, so that's right there. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
The technology, of course, at the time was so mesmerizing. We sort of take it for granted today. But I might have mentioned this when we talked about, or when I recorded the thing for Jurassic Park before. But when ILM did the special effects for that, so Lucas was involved in the CGI of the dinosaurs, and legend has it that he saw this and cried because the technology was so, oh my God, look what we've done. We've created a dinosaur. Not probably that different from the characters in Jurassic Park. And I mean, I've read that in several spaces, and I've never heard it denied, so I don't know why it wouldn't be true. That he was so moved by what they had accomplished, and said, "This is the future." Anyway, I felt similarly when I saw. I mentioned this sort of in passing when we first started the podcast. That
yes.
When they go over the hill and Dr. Grant sees the brontosauruses walking through the fields for the first time, and his jaw just drops and he's in awe. I swear to God, the little kid in me cried a little bit at that moment. I'm like, oh my God. I mean, you so want to be there. And from an emotional standpoint, that's my answer. If we want to get a little academic, frankly, and, talk about Spielberg's skills as a filmmaker, that's one of those moments where we have what has sort of now become known as the Spielberg face. I sometimes call it the Spielberg gaze in my class. But that wide-eyed look of silence that the characters have, whether it be Elliot looking up at E.T.'s spaceship or them looking at a 25-foot, great white or whatever it might be, that moment where we're fixed on Dr. Grant in his face and his eyes and his expression before we see what he sees.
Yes.
And let's again not forget John Williams' contribution, because every time that moment happens in every Spielberg movie, the music swells, and it's just an emotional hit to the gut.
What do you think about the casting in this movie? Because to me, it's funny that you mentioned Jaws in this film, because to me there's so many similarities between Jurassic Park and Jaws, not just because they're both monster movies, but the casting in the films are so perfect, Joe.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know that. Honestly, I've never really thought about that. It's a good point. I mean, I kind of just took the casting for granted. I would, and this is my bias showing, of course, but I would say that the casting in Jaws is perfect.
Yes.
I don't know. There's some that probably don't necessarily like the casting of Dr. Malcolm, so
I do know that, I don't know whether it's true or not, or I don't know whether I'm spreading rumors, but I do know that as my friends would tell you, that I have a friend named James. He loves Spielberg as well, and he's mad on Jurassic Park. And he told me that Sam Neill and Jeff Goldblum actually didn't get along at all during the film of this movie.
Yeah, I don't know that. I don't know that much about the production story.
Right.
Jeff Goldblum to me, and I like Goldblum, and but he takes over. He's always playing Jeff Goldblum in every movie he's in. So
yes.
In some ways it sort of takes you out of the narrative a little bit. So that's not really a slight on him. I'm just pointing it out since you talked about casting.
Okay, so let's move on to the sequel. Have you any thoughts on the sequel, and do you think it kind of lives up to the name of Jurassic Park?
Well, sequels are always a tricky bit, and
yes.
I don't know how much. The short answer is yes. So let me just start with that.
Yes. Yep.
I think the fact that Spielberg directed it lends some credence to it, and I think we tend to subconsciously give it a little bit more love than maybe we would have if it hadn't been.
Yes, yeah.
And I'm on a slippery slope here, and I want to be very careful how I say this. I don't hate Jaws 2.
I don't hate Jaws 2. I actually think Jaws 2 is pretty good.
Yeah, I do too, and it's certainly not on the same level as Jaws, so let me get that clear. I don't want emails and whatever. But I wonder if historically Jaws 2 would have gotten a little bit more love if Spielberg had directed it. The exact same movie. Now, obviously that's an academic question, because
I suppose
Spielberg had directed it, it wouldn't be the same movie. But
I suppose to be fair though, Joe, Jaws 2 is actually a massive smash hit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I mean. And that's not surprising from a business standpoint.
Yeah, yeah.
And frankly, the same with
obviously, I think Roy Scheider, owes a lot to that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that a lot of the supporting cast was brought back. Trivia-wise, Jeannot Schwark, who directed Jaws 2. Has, some beloved cult favorites under his belt as well, like
really?
Supergirl. He directed Supergirl, if you didn't know that. And Somewhere in Time, which is a cult classic.
Ah, okay.
Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour. Anyway, but going back to Lost World, there's some great set pieces in it. I mean, certainly the RV set piece is great over the cliff. The moment that strikes me the most about that. Well, two. Kind of one broad and one specific is where the little kid is looking out his window and sees the T-Rex, because that's such a Spielberg touch, because there's no kid alive, I don't think, who didn't imagine something like that, looking out their window. They were scared at night or whatever, whether it be a T-Rex or Godzilla or some kind of giant monster or whatever. So I really loved the fact that the dinosaur, came to San Diego, because that's a fantasy or a fear, however you want to look at it, that I think we all had at one point or another. And it's kind of a throwback homage to Ray Harryhausen movies and Beast from 20,000 Fathoms or something like that. And that the monster on the loose in San Diego kind of a thing is a good hook to me.
So obviously with Jurassic World just around the corner, seeing the trailer, I actually think it looks pretty cool. But do you feel, I kind of feel, Joe, that just for being this kind of third wheel movie, do you think that's going to get panned anyway? What are your thoughts on Jurassic World?
Well, again, I think this is where we're going to get the snarky critics, some of which are going to say, we don't really need this. It doesn't live up to the original, blah, 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 blah. And all of that may be true. I mean, I don't know. I haven't seen the film yet, so I can't say that. But I think I'd be willing to bet significant money that we're going to get reviews that sound like that.
Yes. And,
I'm sort of the same mind. I'd rather have more Jurassic Park than less.
Yes.
So, there's always that the concept of diminishing returns with sequels of any kind almost. So, I think we know that. We expect it to some degree. And, I don't think I don't think sequels detract from the original. At least not to me personally.
Yes.
And kind of coming full circle here, I think that's why it's important to educate people on original films, and classic films. I have no problem if my students, for example, I always bring them up, but it could be anybody really. If they love, XYZ new quote unquote movie, as long as they can recognize the antecedents of it or where it came from, or, the original Jaws or the original Jurassic Park or even just going back to classic movies and, Casablanca and Citizen Kane or whatever. So, I don't, look, I'm not going to lie. I love in the trailer when, the little kind of homage to Jaws when, they feed that great white shark to the, I don't know what kind of sea dinosaur that is, but
that does look very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's going to be good. I agree exactly with what you said, and I think that however good the movie is, that's going to get panned more than likely. But the trailer looks strong to me, and also I think Chris Pratt as an actor is amazing. I love the job he did in the Guardians of the Galaxy film.
Absolutely, thoroughly entertaining.
It was an amazing film. I didn't know anything about the comic books or anything either, so I was kind of blown away by that.
Yeah, I felt the same. I didn't know the backstory either. I mean, I knew that it was a comic, an obscure one from I think the late 60s. That much I knew, and that was all I knew. And I was just very entertained by that movie.
So there's another rumors there that Chris Pratt is indeed going to be a new Indiana Jones. Have you heard that, Jim?
Yeah, I don't even know if that's rumor. Isn't that fact at this point? Or
really?
It may be the rumor's so strong that I've already anointing it as fact, but.
I think that's a cool casting. I think there's a little bit of Indiana Jones in Chris, he looks the part.
Oh yeah. Now, here's where I might be kind of sending a mixed signal here.
Go on.
I don't know that, he's, the rumor I've heard he's going to play Indiana Jones, right?
Yes.
He's not going to be, I think if you're doing a reboot, I think that's great casting. Or interesting casting, I should say.
Yes.
Maybe I'll refrain from great. I'll say interesting. I don't know that I want Spielberg to do a reboot. That's my only issue with that. If we're going to have a Spielberg Indiana Jones, I want 65 or whatever 70-year-old Harrison Ford. I do.
But is it actually going to be Steven Spielberg doing the film?
Well, again, I don't know the answer to that. I know that, I know he's been announced as the director of Indiana Jones 5.
Right.
These things change. So, in fact, I was kind of glancing at IMDb before I came on with you, and yeah, Indiana Jones 5 is announced with him attached to direct.
Well, I've got to say that just from hearing that, I'm excited.
Well, like I said, that one mixes a little bit for me because
I agree. I do agree with you that maybe we shouldn't have Steven Spielberg direct his own movie again, like as a reboot. But I think maybe he'll bring sort of more current things to the table with Indiana Jones, because you don't also know what the storyline is going to be at this point, I guess.
No, that's true, and will remain to be seen. I don't,
What do you feel about going kind of further forward to more current films? What do you feel about the Spielberg Peter Jackson partnership that was Tintin? Because I enjoyed it.
I don't know anything. I don't know if it's a European thing or not, but I knew nothing about Tintin.
Yes.
So it was completely, coming at it with no expectations.
Right.
I'm not going to sit here and tell you I enjoyed it. I could recognize, Spielbergian moments in it.
Yes.
I'm lukewarm. That's my answer.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a funny thing, I guess. That's something that, before we spoke, I didn't really think about that. Probably a lot of Americans as a whole don't know about Tintin. Is that true?
That's absolutely true. I mean, it's again, pun intended, a completely foreign thing to us.
Right, okay.
For the most part, which my understanding is, and I don't know, it's originally a French.
Yes.
Yeah, so I don't know how much that bleeds into the rest of Europe, but I understand it's very popular in Europe.
Very, very huge in Europe, and obviously more so in France, but very, very well known, and a massive kind of comic book artist guy, Hergé, and I think also Steven Spielberg was a big fan of Hergé even before the movie was even kind of announced to be his.
Well, yeah, and obviously, I guess maybe I'm misspeaking when I say no one in America knows who that is, because obviously there are fans like Spielberg or
yes.
People who, for one reason or another, have been exposed to that and become fans. But as a general popular culture thing, it is an unknown entity to Americans.
Now, speaking about an unknown entity, when I mention this film to people, they don't really know that it was a Spielberg film. But I love this film. It's one of my Spielberg favorites. Catch Me If You Can, the Tom Hanks, Leonardo DiCaprio movie. What do you feel about this one?
That's another one of those that, again, certainly I've seen, but it's been a while, so my memory is a little hazy. But it's funny because, as a Spielberg scholar, I'm actually doing, I didn't mention this earlier, but I'm actually working on a PhD, and my dissertation is going to be on Spielberg.
Right.
So one of the things, and I guess if I'm putting this out there into the world, I better back it up down the road. But, my eventual goal, this is too big for the dissertation, but is to do a shot-by-shot breakdown of every Spielberg film. And for the dissertation, I'm going to choose about 8 films.
Right.
And I was trying to judge which 8 films I should choose. Do I go strictly by box office or critical rating, or do I just cherry pick the ones I want to use? I'm still kind of toying with some of that. But as I was kind of looking at the various ways that I might sort of select the 8 movies that I'm probably going to use for this, Catch Me If You Can keeps popping up.
Really?
As one that goes under, at least under my radar, as more successful and more popular than I remember it being.
Yes, yeah. That's really weird that you say that, because whoever I mention it to, put it this way, a lot of my friends haven't even heard of this film. But to me, I love the film. I think, once again, Spielberg is great with the casting. Leonardo DiCaprio is great. Tom Hanks, I mean, come on, the guy's an absolute icon. I don't know what your thoughts are on Tom, but to me,
I love Tom, yeah.
I love Tom. So just for a second, let's talk in generals. I would love to know, Joe, Spielberg or not Spielberg, other than Spielberg, what are your favorite movies ever? What would you class as your kind of top 5 movies?
Now that's a much tougher. I said I have an easy answer for my favorite movie. But when we start expanding it into my top 5,
yes.
Sometimes that's mood dependent. Sometimes that is, genre dependent. I tend to and this is maybe too cliche as a film professor, but I do tend to favor the classics.
Right, go on.
So off the top of my head, I'm thinking, Jaws for me is number 1, but as a favorite. Now, if we're talking best film of all time, that's a whole other conversation, and I don't know if I want to go down that path. But I certainly could make a case for Jaws being the best, but that's an argument I may or may not win. Anyway, to answer your question, Godfather, Citizen Kane, Lawrence of Arabia. I love Singing in the Rain, 2001, The Graduate. I'm a huge fan of Charlie Chaplin's City Lights, Casablanca. Really the canon of classics. I guess that skews probably a little bit more American classics, but nonetheless, I go with that. It's not that different from the AFI 100 list, frankly.
That's funny to me, Joe, because like I said about being brought up with American culture, and just being from the UK, there's something about America that I absolutely love. And speaking to a lot of you guys on the podcast, whether it be from different backgrounds, it's just more that I love about the country that I think about. And I would love to know, this is going to sound real left field question here, but it's back on the conspiracy theory front, because I would like to know about your take on 9/11 and whether, I've been asking people about this, whether they actually think that's an inside job. So what do you think, Joe?
Well, I'm not going to go there. I mean, I don't. The short answer is I don't think that.
Yes. Yep.
Not to sort of bring the podcast down, but that's still, it's certainly not an American. It's not solely an American tragedy; it's a worldwide tragedy. But obviously, it hits us Americans in part. I lost a former, friend and classmate in that, and so that's where conspiracy stretches go a little too far for me.
Right. Okay.
As I said earlier, as a conspiracy interest in conspiracy theories, I'm always kind of fascinated at the arguments, but. Yeah, I don't think that's the case here.
I don't think so either. So just to completely level with you, I agree. Back on the movie front, you brought up some interesting movies, and what I was going to say was that just from being from the UK, it's interesting because as a favourite movie front, I wouldn't even think of a UK movie off the top of my head that I'd include in that, just because I don't know, the UK kind of sense of humour is one that is very different to me, and I don't know whether you like any English-made movies but for me personally, I much prefer American humor, and whether it be Jaws or Ghostbusters or Back to the Future or even Pleasantville and City Slickers. But to me, the American humor is a lot more kind of easygoing, and that is what I like.
Yeah, well, I mean, looking at it from the flip side, there are certainly people, here in America that, especially some of our top comic minds who, worship at the ground of British humor, Python probably being at the top of that. and I certainly like Monty Python. I don't probably, go as crazy as I know some people do, but, boy, there's certainly whole, articles and books and dissertations written on the sort of the differences between British and American humor. I will say this, and this will probably, I'll either lose all credibility or gain a lot, depending on who's listening to this.
Go on.
But, as a kid, I loved Benny Hill. So,
yes.
I'm not going to sit here and I'm not going to deny the fact that I was a kid and that was a good way to see, pretty women in scantily clad outfits.
That is a whole different ball game, Joe, because that is British sitcom is what I'd call that. And Benny Hill, Blackadder, Open Hours, Only Fools and the Horses, that kind of stuff. I love that kind of stuff. But as for movies, I don't know. There's not a lot of UK movies that really grab me. I guess a lot of kind of female fans would say Notting Hill or that kind of stuff, or Love Actually. But for me, no, I don't know what it is,
Well, it's funny, do we count? I mean, do we even count those as British films? I mean, just because Hugh Grant's in them doesn't mean that,
That's true.
I mean, I wouldn't, but, I mean, for that matter, is Lawrence of Arabia a British film? I mean, arguments could be made.
Definitely. So yeah, it's been very interesting, Joe. I love to chat and see you in general, and that's been very much fun on my end, man. So I hope you enjoyed it too.
Oh, I did, and there's so much more to talk about. Hopefully we can do this again sometime.
That has been Joe Fortunato. I've been Carl Eggert, and you've been listening to Monday Night Carlo.
The name's Nukem, Duke Nukem, and when I'm not kicking ass and chewing gum, I'm listening to Monday Night Carlo. Let's rock.
And that was such a great chat with Joe. I'd like to thank Joe Fortunato for being on the show. And we have got so much more to cover and talk about. And that is exactly why Joe is heading to the podcast for a part 2 conversation with me. And we talk about all things more in general about Spielberg, about George Lucas, about John Williams that we hardly touched upon, as well as superheroes in general, whether it be Superman, Spider-Man, and his take on why today's Batman just doesn't cut it. It's all here, all with Joe Fortunato, and that's coming soon for part 2, right here on Monday Night Carlo. But from this week's podcast, we'd like to thank you for listening, thank you for your comments, and we will catch you down the road on MNC. Why not come and like the official Monday Night Carlo Facebook page, facebook.com/EggerCarlMNC. That's facebook.com/EggetTCarlMNC.
You've been listening to Monday Night Carlo. All views and opinions expressed by the Carlo are all his own and do not represent any other entity.